again and good afternoon on this very blessed day of another live talk, presentation, and broadcast. As always, it is a blessing to come before you and to share in the work of ministry with you in this setting, to be able to bring topics and ideas and matters that are relating to the world and how we can discuss it in a setting where we are able to enlighten, inform, and be a bit less tense than when we're doing a sermon. So if you're coming right now onto the broadcast, we are just so thankful that you take the time to share in ministry with us on this live talk presentation. And I am joined by an incredible woman who has done a lot of work in the area that we're about to talk about. And we are looking at how women around the world are walking in their divine purposes and some of the many challenges that they have had to face in order to fulfill those tasks. And we want to do that as gracefully as possible by being able to represent God and his daughter as well. So I'm going to ask my guest, Dawn Minot, who is a UN advisor and also an author who has done a lot of work with women around the world and has seen her fair share of the disadvantages and the challenges that women face globally. So, Dawn, welcome to the platform. It is an incredible blessing to share in this ministry opportunity with you. And why don't you tell us how you came into this area of work and how it has impacted your work as a woman and how you have used that place of influence to bless and to touch the lives of other women.
Thank you, Pastor Josie. What a pleasure to be here with you on this amazing platform that you have been using to bless people all over the world. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to have this conversation, really. Where do I start? I think, I honestly have to say that I was called into this work. For the longest while, I questioned whether my paid work was really my ministry. And along the way, God has really revealed in so many ways that, yes, what you're getting paid for is your ministry work. So in many ways, that has been a blessing to be able to do what I do and know that it has a direct impact on the lives of women and girls and people in general. But knowing that this type of work is of service to God as well, because it is of service to his children. So I work with the United Nations, and I was very purposeful when I was in university. I chose to study the UN. I wanted to be a part of an organization that had a global reach in terms of the ability that it will have for me to be able to have the greatest impact through my work. And so with the UN, I'm able to do this work on addressing issues around violence against women and girls. And it's been a tremendous blessing to do that. And so I'm very thankful, one, to have this job, but thankful that it can also be used as a means to bless people as well.
That is very incredible, and I've always admired that aspect of your journey. And I like that you called it a calling, because very often we put callings in the context of only having some kind of theological training and background.
Exactly.
And that is actually not correct. A calling can take on many forms, including the theological aspect. But I do believe that whatever we are doing in the world as believers, that God intends to use us in that very area. And you mentioned, that some of your areas of specialty has been, looking at the matters of violence and injustices towards women and young girls. Not that your work is exclusive to women only, but definitely that area has been of impact. Tell us a little bit about, as you have traveled globally and you have come into certain areas and countries around the world, tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that you've had that has really touched you in the way that women are treated in various parts of the world. And do you see a disparity in one location to the next? Because you've lived in Canada, you of Caribbean descent, you now live in the United States, you've been in Africa, you lived there for a time, and in other countries where you have served the UN. Tell us a little bit about the disparity that you have seen in terms of the way that women are treated globally.
That's a really interesting question because I actually first want to contextualize that in the fact that whether it's in Africa or whether it's in North America or the Caribbean, the system under which we live is still the same, and that's a patriarchal system. And a patriarchal system, in many ways, is beneficial to men as leaders and as decision makers, and to that extent disadvantage women. So regardless of where women are located, that system already puts them at some level of disadvantage and disempowerment. And so I particularly want to maybe focus my response on the time that I served in Nigeria, because that particular experience changed me in many ways. It made my commitment to the work I do even greater than before I served in Nigeria, but it also resonated with me on a very personal level. And what I'm referring to is in 2014, when those girls who were kidnapped from their school in Chibok, in northern Nigeria. And that happened around my birthday. And I am very particular about my birthday. So it's always a time of celebration. But when this happened, I could not celebrate. These girls were based in a school in a state that I was covering from my office. And so this indirectly impacted me, but in a way that was very personal. And so when you think about the fact that these young girls were at the last year of their studies, they were doing their final exams in a context like northern Nigeria, where very few girls get to go to school and to complete school, that in itself was a tremendous achievement, not just for the girls, but for their parents, their mothers and fathers who believed that their girl children should be educated and put the resources that was necessary to facilitate that. And at the very end of this journey, this educational journey, these girls were kidnapped from their school. And we know the brutality that they went through. And the reality is that before this happened in Chibok, which is really when the global media got a hold of it, these kidnappings were happening across Africa and in many parts of the world long before that. It's just that at that particular time, the world was seeing it through the eyes of the experiences of these girls in Chibok. And so for me, that was very personal because, as I said before, these girls were in the state I was covering. But this doesn't change the dynamic. So whether you're talking about violence against women in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Nigeria, it's still the same. The impact is still the same. The trauma is still the same. The long-lasting effects that this have on women and girls is still the same. It's psychological, it's physical, it's emotional. There's all of these trauma that women carry in their bodies for years and years after the initial abuse. And then there are circumstances where sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. So in situations like what happened in Chibok or in other countries where there's civil conflict or any kind of unrest, where the bodies of women are used as weapons, so that rape is purposeful. It is used as part of the response to war and actually classified as a international crime. So these are the kinds of circumstances that women find themselves in. And, as I said before, regardless of where they are located, the impact and the trauma that they go through remain the same regardless of location.
That is very incredible stuff, just listening to it. Personally, I have a very great sensitivity to those topics. Um, Being, in ministry and having dealt with women who have been violated, who have been raped in some cases multiple times,
Yeah.
or by group rapes at
Mm-hmm.
young ages. So I've had to minister to individuals who have gone through and experienced those traumas. And I remember in my earliest stages of ministry how much I would struggle to get these images off my mind at night. I would
Mm-hmm.
carry these things in my being because I just found it very amazing that one person could go through, these things. Of course, when I was ministering to the person, I never allowed them to see, that I was being, that impacted. But I would go home and I would think about that. So I always
Yeah.
find the issues of rape and sexual violence against women to be so, it's such a sensitive topic because to me, it's kind of like one of the worst things that could happen to you because sex is a
Mm-hmm.
very powerful tool and resource. And it is something that was
Mm-hmm.
always meant to be given by a person willingly, submitting to that activity. And when that is
Yeah.
violently taken away from you, that is a lifetime trauma that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, even 30, 40 years later, they've not been able to shave off. So, but I
Exactly.
appreciated the way that you were able to put into context that the issues that are surrounding violence and abuse around women, it's not something that is just in one part of the world. Maybe the way life is lived in those countries are different, but the nature of the trauma and the violence is still the same. Well, that brings me because you're a Christian woman who truly loves God, and that is to be admired about you as well. And, my journey with God has been a very remarkable one that is filled with a lot of experiences and intricacies and testimonies and adversities. And just, I mean, God and I could make a whole movie. So, but when I think back on my own journey as a daughter of God and growing up, in a setting, being a woman who grew up in the Caribbean, and I know that was your early experience as well, having heard all these conversations about, how God really felt about women, our place, within his service and his work. I look back now that I'm more mature and I understand spirituality from a more personal level than just a religious perspective. I'm able to
Mm-hmm.
put things more into context. And I go back to Genesis 3:15 because I think sometimes, and I am one of those people who is very big on the spirituality of life. And I just want us to talk a bit about who the real enemy is behind a lot of those violence and abuses because it is so easy to just probably say, men ill treat women and then take that perspective. Although, by the way, we have to put into context, there are women who also raped and have molested other women. So the
Yes.
violence concerning women is not just men. It is to a higher proportion by men, but it definitely happens in the same, with the same gender. And I have also dealt with those cases as well. So with that shared, Genesis 4:15 kind of looks at, what transpired once Eve had breached that trust and had violated that godly principle that brought sin into the world. And God had to say to her, I'm going to have to deal with this, because this is so much bigger than you realize. Now I'm going to have to put a hatred between you and the serpent and his seed. Do you see that hatred playing out today in the violence against women? When God said, I will put enmity between the seed of the serpent and between the woman and the serpent, between their seeds. Personally, from a spiritual perspective, I see that being played out in the violence amongst women and the debasing of women. What are your thoughts on that as from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, there are 2 points here, Pastor Josie. One is on, yes, that this is spiritual warfare. In the carrying out of my duties in the context of the UN, I will not say that this is spiritual warfare because it will not be understood.
Understood.
But I operate
Right.
I operate as a Christian knowing that this is spiritual warfare.
Right.
And because I know that and I operate from that position, it enables me to do my work in a way that's different from someone else in the same field doing the same work, but from a different perspective. So that's one. The second, and I'll come back to that in a bit. The second part of this is the use of biblical, and not just biblical, but all holy text, and how in many ways the Bible, the Quran, and any other holy text can be used to justify the mistreatment and the disempowerment of women. So let me go back to the spiritual warfare, and then I'll come back to how texts are used.
Or
As
misuse.
or misuse, exactly. It's the misuse, right? So as Christians, we recognize that there are two powers at play in all spheres of our lives. The extent to which we're seeing violence right now, particularly under this COVID pandemic, is to a level that we had not seen prior to the pandemic. Not that the pandemic is the cause of this level of violence, because, as I said before, this is based a lot on the inequities that are built into our society. And so because of these inequities, whether it be that women do not have equal access to work or get paid equally for similar work done, or that there is some level of dependency that they have on their male partners because of this level of either unemployment or underemployment. The fact that women have more responsibility for care work, caring for children, caring for the elderly, even caring for their husbands, in addition to having their paid jobs. So there's greater demand on their time as well. When you put all of these in context, what we're seeing now has been exacerbated under this pandemic. So women who are typically in maybe low paying jobs or in a social sector have lost their jobs. So that level of dependency is greater under this pandemic. Then we also have the issue of the decisions that were taken by our governments to control this pandemic. Was about restricting movements and lockdowns. So in many instances where women and girls would find their places of work or school as a safe haven, a place to get away from home, now that's taken away and they're locked into the spaces with their abusers. So in the context of all of this, when you look at what's happening in the world around us as Christians, and we know that we're living in the very end of time, when you put that in that context, you realize that whatever it is that we're going to give as our response, from the response of the UN or the response of government, they will take it from a worldly position, as they should. But then that leaves an avenue for the church. There's a gap there that the church can fill, because then we understand that these are the fights that we're having is against principalities and powers that we cannot see, but we know that they exist. So the role of the church in responding to these issues cannot be downplayed. This is actually an opportunity for the church to step up and to meet the needs of its congregation at the places where the needs are greatest. And right now we know that those needs are greatest as it relates to violence against women and girls. So I think that opportunity right there is something that the church can really take a hold of and build on. So we might not be able to respond in the way that governments respond, because that's not our calling. Our calling is to meet people at the point of their greatest need. That's what Christ said. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. And when I was hungry, you came and you fed me. In other words, he could be saying, when I was being beaten upon, you opened up a space for me to go as a safe haven. right? So that's what, as a church, we're called to do in responding from a spiritual point of view to what's happening in our physical world. Now, going back to Genesis and what happened and the hatred that could be associated with Eve and therefore by extension to women generally. I think we have to be careful in looking at holy text and making interpretations based on what we see, because in many times we're making those interpretations and we're projecting them into the context and the culture of our times. These holy texts were not written in our culture, they were not written in our times. That God made a pronouncement in terms of what would happen because of the consequence of sin. And yes, down through the ages, women and men have had to bear the consequences of those sins. But that does not in any way take away from God's position on women and God's position on men. It was never the intention of God for women to be any less than men. Yes, there is a different role. For many reasons, we're physically not the same. Our calling is not the same, but our standing before God is the same. And that level of equality is what I think we need to pay attention to in when we talk about these verses. So yes, there's a curse for a man, there's a curse for a woman, as the Bible described it. It doesn't take away, however, the fact that equal before God is a woman, equal before God is a man. And therefore, when we react and interact with each other, we have to operate from that point of equality as God sees us and as God operates with us.
And I thank you for sharing that and giving that level of light to the conversation. And you are absolutely correct. It is not a passport to continue or perpetuate that level of wickedness of the human against each other. From my original perspective, though, I was looking at it in terms of the enemy's own, hatred towards the woman, and that being perpetuated in a lot of the violence that you see happening in these matters around the world. But you gave it a very powerful, perspective in terms of, not using that as an excuse to say, that, look, it is okay to go on and to perpetuate that kind of violence and unkindness.
Yeah. And Pastor Josie, if I could just jump in here a little bit as well,
Yes.
because the enemy is after every single one of God's children.
Oh yes, male
he's
and
after
female.
men, he's after women. And the Bible specifically says, like, he goes after the ones that piss at the wall. That's men. Like, he's strategic. He's strategic. And in many of the instances where we see these increases in violence, you can also look at the impact, whether it be economic or psychological or social impact of what's happening in the world around us and how that's impacting our men. And we're making this taping in the United States. If we think about, and it's actually at the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. So when you look at the experiences, particularly of African American men in America, and their efforts to deal with issues of race and racism and the inequities and the injustice that is directed toward them as Black men. And this is in no means to justify, but it's an explanation as to why when those encounters happen in the society, that it can then be turned around to perpetrate, as they say, hurt people. And so that what men are often experiencing in our societies is then turned around upon the women that are in their lives, right? So I don't think we can divorce the context of which our men are operating in and how that impact how they manage their own relationships and the trauma and the pressure that comes from these societal challenges and how that in turn impact their behaviors in their personal relationships as well.
And that right there is actually another powerful perspective, because you're looking at a continual cycle of dysfunction, where the people who are supposed to be looking out for each other are actually hurting each other, because of all their own personal traumas. And it makes sense, because even in an everyday relationship, if you yourself you're not healthy, what do you really give to that other situation? So uh that there is another. I always tend to pick up these part twos out of this presentation. I think that right there is a part two. Well, let's talk, because you just bring such light, incredible light, to certain areas of the dialogue, which really does make sense, because really and truly, somebody cannot be great to you if they're broken inside. Now, they may look awesome, they may be well dressed, they
Yeah.
may be muscular, they maybe have everything well together externally. But really and truly, if on the inside, you yourself, you're a broken vessel, what do you really give to the other person, except you are very intentional about being or becoming a better person so you can be better to the person in your life? If,
Yeah.
yeah, other than that, really, you're unhealthy, they're unhealthy. So what really comes out of that situation? And I again believe, to your point earlier, in regards to as a community of faith, where we also come in, it's doing teachings and programs, but above all, providing avenues and resources whereby those kind of issues can be addressed, so that we can restore the souls of people, which is why Life Talk is now called Restored Soul. Because ultimately, when you look at the issues of life, and Proverbs said, to guard the heart, because out of it flows the issues of life. We have issues,
Hmm.
even in
Yeah.
our very best selves, because many of us do very great things in our professional lives, but personally, we have our struggles.
Yeah.
We still have to face adversity. We still have to deal with relational issues, where we deal with breakups, and we deal with hurt, and we deal with pain, and we have to get up and still go minister to the people that we are serving, whether it's on a regular job or it's in ministry. So when you look at life in general, the truth is there's nobody who is exempt of pain or dysfunction or trauma. If you were to ask, maybe today everybody looks great and they have their act together, but really, if we were to go deeply within each of us, there are things there that has caused us injury, and some of us have had to heal on our own, or
Yeah.
through our spiritual journeys, or relying on God, because we didn't find the safe havens within the community of faith. Unfortunately, sometimes sadly, what we found was judgment and criticism. What's your problem?
Yeah.
Why are you like that? What's her problem? Never really asking really deeply, is something wrong? Can I help?
Hmm.
Are you okay? You don't seem yourself. It's kind of like, what's her problem? What's his problem? And then people move away from that. So, there is so much work that is yet left to do, because we have to learn how to effectively minister to each other. So that brings me back to the conversation of a woman now, having gone through all of the things that you've described and seen around the world in regards to violence and trauma and all of those things. How do you come out of that and even try to process walking in a calling? Does that even mean anything to such a woman? So, can you shed a little light on that?
Yeah. So I think the when you're in this line of work, it's really important to want to be transparent and to be vulnerable and to be true to yourself. And I say that to say this: you don't see these experiences and not get impacted by it. There's just no way, especially if you're serving as a child of God. And I'm going to relate again to my experience in Nigeria. I remember I was out to lunch with one of the staff, and she said to me, Madam, why did you choose to come to Nigeria? Aren't you scared? And she's Muslim, and a great part of why I loved working in Nigeria was it gave me a chance to minister in an indirect way to people who were not of my faith. And this was one of those opportunities. And I was able to explain to her that I believe that I was on assignment by God. And if they're okay. And that's what I mean by, being transparent and vulnerable, being real with yourself and knowing what it is that you're up against in the work that you're doing. So being exposed to all of this does have its impact. And I am a strong advocate for counseling. I know in our community, especially the Caribbean, well, actually, no, in the Black community, we don't do counseling because, we
No,
just
we
don't,
don't.
that's not our thing.
No.
That's not our thing. But mental health and thankfully, if for no other reason under COVID, has really gotten the attention that it needs to have and has been taken out of that realm of stigma or is being taken out of that realm of stigma. So our mental health is as important as our physical health. And recognizing that when you do this work, it does have an impact on you. You must care to do this. And so therefore, some of it is going to into your spirit, will get into your soul. And in the same way that God has equipped medical doctors with the skills to heal a broken arm or a broken leg, He's also given psychologists and psychiatrists the skill to heal a broken mind and to heal a broken spirit. So as I'm a Christian, God is my confidant. I talk to him about everything, but I also know that there's some things where you need to sit with a professional and say, these are my experiences, have a talk through with a talk professional, and have the counsel that is required to get you strong enough to continue into the next area of your work. So for me, 100% on board for counseling. And then there are also other things that you can do for self-care. Spending time with God. The world is now talking a lot now about meditation. As Christians, we know this. We have our times with God. That's our meditation time. We call devotional time. That's a very powerful tool to be able to sit in quiet. And what I love about David, when David was writing those powerful psalms, and there were those moments when you want you to just kind of stop and rest in that, he would say Selah, pause and reflect, right? Even in Psalms 4, he says, I will sit on my bed and I will commune in my own heart. That's meditation, right? So that's an invitation from God for us to spend time with him. And in the process of doing that, there are things that will be revealed about our own, issues. As you were saying earlier, Pastor Josie, we all have issues. The enemy has made sure from the time that we were conceived to that very moment that we entered the world, he's like, I've got a plan for you in the same way that God has a plan for us. And his plan, the devil's plan for us, as we know, there's nothing good about it. So issues
Steal,
that
kill,
we have
and destroy.
and destroy, right? Yeah. So that's why we all have issues. But the counter to that is that God also has a plan, and it's a plan to prosper. It's a plan to bring us to an end that is expected. So in addition to seeking professional counseling, I say seek God, but seek God in a meaningful way, not the conversations, in fact, not the monologue where you go, dear God, give me, amen, bye. But the conversation where you actually sit, as David says, and commune in your heart with him And you'll be surprised to see how he communicates back to you. I mean, Pastor Joseph, there are things that I've seen on your Facebook page. For example, I'm going through something and I get to Facebook, and it just happens that you are the story that's first for me to see, and the text that you have on your story is the text I need to see. And I said, okay, Daddy, God, I got it. Thank you. So that's how real. So I have never heard the voice of God, and honestly, I think if I do, I may fall off my chair and die. So maybe that's why he's
Please
like, let me
don't.
not. Let me give her some Bible verses, but maybe she can't do the voice thing. That might be too real for her. Yeah, but he's very real to us, and whether it be a text in the right moment, a phone call. Pastor Josie, you and I have had these conversations where you call me and you're like, God has asked me to ask you to do something. And I'm like, the answer is yes, because he already told me that this was going to happen. I just didn't know that you were going to be the one to call. So that's the realness of how God heals, right? So that there's a chance for us as well to just sit and to be still with him and to let him heal us as well.
That key word right there, realness, that it is very hard for people to be that way. It was hard for me to be that way until God shattered those limitations and those barriers. I was so committed to protecting my privacy and my secrecy of my life. I felt whatever I did really was nobody's business. It was really between me and God. I wasn't into testimonies. I really felt that testimonies were very intrusive. I remember as a young girl when we made our transition from the denomination that we were in to the Adventist church, and I was hearing people testify for the first time, and they would talk about not having food, not having money, and God had helped them. I was mortified. I was like, these people need to seek help. You don't do these things in public. I was like, Josie Frampton, will never, as long as I live life on the face of this earth, nobody would ever get me to go before an audience and to tell them that we didn't have things. When I was growing up and you didn't have things, you kept that to yourself.
Yes.
That was a very private matter. If you ever spoke about that, you were embarrassing and humiliating your family. You could be excommunicated or be beaten very severely. So I was like, something is wrong with this picture. Well, there I was now as an adult, got into ministry. And I remember very distinctly when the Lord said to me, you have this mindset about your privacy and people not knowing things about you and you being very locked about your life. You, this young lady right here, you're going to open your mouth and you're going to tell the world what I have done for you, which is how my first memoir was actually written. He Leadeth Me. And God in heaven knows I struggled to write this book, because it was everything that I was not. Everything I would have never done, God was asking me to do, to be so vulnerable and to be so open about very detailed and private things that people that were even very close to me had never known about me. And, those are the miracles to me of, God, that he would actually ask you to do things that may be uncomfortable. But here's what I did discover in writing that memoir. It was where I actually first felt liberated for the first time in my whole life. I felt so free because I had carried so many things on the inside of me. I had carried so many of my secrets and other people's secrets that God was like, if you're going to be effective in ministry, you can't come to people with this mindset that your life is perfect. They must see the side of you that is also broken, that is also struggling, that had fears and had anxieties and felt, issues and hurts and passed through relationships that were not pleasant. And you cried too. And people broke up with you too. So when
Right.
you minister to them, they know that you're coming from a place of compassion and understanding because you walk that walk. And I'm not saying we have to do that in every situation, because there's still many things about my life that I will not share, that I feel is still private to myself. I still do feel that as it relates to courting and dating, it's not something that I want to give to the public like that. So I still believe, that things like your marriage and things like that, you should preserve and safeguard, and you shouldn't just throw that out to the courts of public opinion. I think some
Yeah.
things are sacred, right? So if you're sharing a testimony and you came out of something, I can understand God inspiring you to share what happened. But as far as being in the situation and living out a marriage, personally, this is me, and this is not to offend anyone. I just feel like it's sacred and it should be protected
Yeah.
from the courts of public opinion. So there's still some things that I will not say and not share. But as much as it is inspired, because like you just shared, you will go on my page and you will see that I shared something and it ministered to you. Those posts are very inspired by God. I need you to share that today. It may minister to the heart of someone, and then I
Yeah.
respond to that. But being vulnerable, especially in the areas of ministry, if you're a spiritual leader, it is very hard, because you don't want the people that you're ministering to ever think that you
God.
are broken
Yeah.
or that you
Yeah.
have issues. You want to always give that semblance of perfection, that your life is great enough that you could deal with this. But the cracks are crumbling under this, because you have 46% of ministers living ministry because they are too overwhelmed. You have another several others that are contemplating leaving because it is too overwhelming. You have the other several that fell into morality because of the immorality, because of the pressure. And then you have a bunch of others who have even committed suicide. And I feel that if probably enough courage is given to just be able to be real and authentic with your journey, then at least maybe the community of faith could hold you accountable to not putting a gun to your head, because they know that you're a
Yeah.
human being. So what are your
You
thoughts on
know,
that?
Pastor, let, what are my thoughts? Oh my gosh, that's maybe too open a question, but let me start with this. So I'm gonna say privileged, because I feel like I was privileged to have read your memoir. I might have actually gotten a pre-published copy, I think, because I was one of the first people to actually interact with you on
Yeah.
that book, and I hope you're gonna bring it back out to the public again and do a relaunch. I think we talked about that.
Yes.
Um, but what I loved about your story, and I think this is the power of our experiences, right? Because we know that as children of God, no experience goes to waste.
Mm-mm.
That He bottles our tears, right? So they're so precious. When our experiences cause us to cry, the intensity is so much that it forces liquid out of us,
My
that
Lord.
God says, I feel your pain, I see your agony, and I'm going to bottle the evidence of this. And then later on, he says, if you have experiences that seem like ashes, meaning that everything is burnt and gone to naught, it no longer exists, he says, I will give you beauty for that,
Wow.
and joy for your pain, right? So all of our experiences, Pastor Josie, what you outlined in your memoir, that's what makes you the powerful minister that you are. Because somebody who knows your story and who can relate to your story can say, I've been there and my pastor has been there. Okay, so I can make it too. Right? And that's why God allows these things to happen to us. He could, as God, protect us from
From
every plan the
anything.
devil has for
Mhm.
us.
It is true.
Yeah, he could, but he allows, and the word of God tells us that he measures and then decides, okay,
Wow.
my daughter can take this, right? So when he allows these experiences to happen to us, he's already equipped us with what we need to respond to it in terms of our own healing if we submit ourselves to him and, like David say, sit and commune with him. So he's given us what we need to heal. But then from that experience, he's also giving us a ministry. I cannot talk to somebody who has been divorced, not in the same way that a divorcee can. Right? Because I know of it, theoretically. But when you've lived that experience and someone is going through it, you can say, I understand. I can empathize. I have been there. And that makes your ministry so much stronger. So yeah, I loved your memoir. I can't wait for you to bring it back out there so more women can be, and men can have access to it, because it really is a powerful story, the way that it was told. And then to look at how you have grown as a woman of God and how you have evolved into what he wanted that story to do for you and for his ministry. So yeah, let's get that book back up there.
Yes. I look forward. It celebrates 10 years this year. Amazingly, I can't believe it. It's already a decade. And we've already talked about the relaunch and all of the great things that we'll be doing very soon.
Yeah,
and I look forward to, I told you, you were the first interview that I did, and I really never did another interview in 10 years. So I look forward to talking about it from the perspective that you mentioned, which is that evolving and, how I was able to survive all the juicy details of my life shared with the public. But I made it 10 years later. I didn't die. I'm still here.
Right.
So God knows exactly, what he's doing. Well, let's talk a bit quickly about how all of this fits into God's design for the Proverbs 31 mentality of a woman, because I always say this, I find this fascinating about the religious world. We admire things in the Bible until it's actually happening. So the Proverbs 31 woman is greatly admired in the religious world. She is industrious, she's ambitious, she is a go-getter. She's a businesswoman. She buys a field. She is a fashion designer because she designs clothing and she makes it and she gives it out. She sees something, she go after it, she makes it happen. She gets up early, she go get her merchants, from afar. So you see a woman who is a wife, she's a mother, but yet she's not idle. She uses all of her gifts and her abilities. We talk about it. Books have been written about it. This is an incredible woman. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her worth is far. Then all of a sudden, the Proverbs 31 woman is in the church and she's overstepping her boundaries.
Yes.
I am so confused. So let's talk a little bit about that as we come closer to the end of our presentation. Why is she admired in the Bible, but she's rejected in the church or within the Christian world?
I'm going to say maybe what I said at the very beginning. When God gave the Bible in his system, and his system is not patriarchy. His system is a system of equality. We have the Bible in a context of patriarchy, where a woman, as described in God's world, is not looked upon positively in man's world.
My Lord.
And I do mean in a man's world, in a patriarchal world. Because everything about this woman as she's described is when we see it in today's woman, and not just in the church, but particularly in the church, because sadly, our church is patriarchal.
And we're speaking about this. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to clarify so that we understand clearly. We're speaking about this in the context, and I would prefer that it is looked upon in the context of not just specific to a denomination, including ours, but within the sphere of Christianity. That is called the people of God and the community of faith.
Yeah. Okay. This is not about denomination. This is about faith-based organization. Yeah. Regardless of your denomination, regardless of your faith,
Right.
The system is the church system, the mosque system, the all it's a patriarchal system where women do not have the same role or rights as men. And so it does not mirror God's system. God's system is not like that. So the Proverbs 31 woman will survive in a system that's designed by God because he intended her to be that way. Because there's also the Proverbs 31 man. And I know we talked about this before, Pastor
Yes,
Josie,
that's
right?
another topic we got to get back to.
Yeah. So 30, Proverbs 31 man will know how to appreciate and to accept and to work with a Proverbs 31
I
woman,
love it. And
right?
I get it is
That,
true.
yeah, and that's the way God designed his system. That's what God had in mind, excepting now the system that we live in does not facilitate that. And just to bring it back a little bit to this conversation we're having about violence against women and girls, um, in addition to, because a lot of my work is about women's empowerment, right? Because in a patriarchal system, you want to get to the empowerment of women, not at all to disempower men, yeah,
No.
but to get to some level of equity. There's equality and there's equity, to get to some level of equity. And the process of doing that, there's also going to be some backlash. So not only do we have programs for empowerment, we also have programs for protection. So the Proverbs 31 woman, as she's described, is an empowered woman. In a patriarchal system, will face a lot of backlash. So we also have to build into that the protection of this woman. What are the protective skills that we will give to her? What are the resilience skills that we can build in, not just for her at the individual level, but at the community level as well, right? So in New York, when you see something, you say something is what we talk about in our public transportation system. It's
Yes.
the entire world that we need to say now. When you see something, say something, right? Because the reality of it is this: a woman's place and a girl's place, safe place, is anywhere that she operates. In her house, on the street, on the bus, on the subway, online. That space should be a safe space. The Proverbs 31 woman should not have any fears of walking down the street because she's going to be catcalled, or that is line conducting her business as she should, that she's going to be cyberbullied or harassed, right? So a lot of what we're talking about here, when we place it in the context of the system that we're living in, we have to recognize that that's not what God had designed when he described this Proverbs 31 woman. And that's still where we want to ascribe to be. And in our churches as well, the conversation about whether women can be ordained as pastors or priests or whatever, I mean, obviously, I can't see God, but I can just imagine God shaking his head and going, "What? Why are they having that conversation? I mean, how many examples do I need to leave behind to say, yes, a woman can do that, right?" So we are really using our time to minor, or to major rather, in the minor things like, can women do certain things in the church, for example, when this is really not what God's attention is about. God's attention is about empowering our women and our men to be able to do the work that's assigned to us to do. We were talking earlier about the spiritual warfare. You want a Proverbs 31 woman to be your spiritual warfare, your spiritual warrior, rather. And you want that from your Proverbs 31 man as well. So, yeah, I 100%, yes, let's change our systems to really allow what God has intended for our women and men to be.
And once again, great perspectives. As you know, from my whole journey, I am always so focused on the purpose and divine calling, the reason for which a person has been brought into the world. For what reason were you allowed to be born? Are you fulfilling that, as it relates to your place in the kingdom of God? And for me, that's really what it has been about and will always be about. Even the topics and subjects of ordination and things like that. I think we've talked about that. I steer away from those topics because, quite honestly, I just really find it to be a non-issue in the broader context of divine matters and purposes.
Yeah.
But I know it is the passion of many, and to each his own. I do respect that if that's where you want to spend your time. I'd rather spend my time where I could use my voice as a voice of influence to bring hope and deliverance to the people of God, whether it is the sons of God or the daughters of God, and to be able to help them to identify the reasons why they have been allowed to grace the planet. Why am I here? For what purpose have I been brought here? And am I fulfilling the reason why I am on the earth? For me, every single day of my life that I awake, those are the questions that press my mind. So that
Yeah.
when God decides my time is done, will those who come behind me find that I was faithful or that I had done what I came to do? And so for me, and I believe from all conversations, I believe you're of that mindset too, but absolutely great, perspective on the topic. I really believe that it is God's desire that his sons and his daughters are able to work together effectively in the partnership of the work of advancing the kingdom of God, to understand that we are not each other's enemies, and neither are we to play a role that seems as if we are, somewhat against each other. But to
Mhm.
understand that if that's a son of God, that's a daughter of God, his spirit is in you, his spirit is in me, then together we work as a force to advance, the great kingdom of God. Well, we have about a minute left. And I just want to ask you very quickly just about two key resources that you feel we can use to, help uh, those that are disenfranchised. You mentioned Safe Haven earlier. So just very quickly, because we're right up on our hour, about at least two key resources that we could focus on as a community of faith that could help with the betterment of the oppressed and disadvantaged.
Just again, because now we're speaking in the context of New York, because this is where we're operating from. But I would say, for sure, in New York State there are domestic shelters, domestic abuse shelters, and those I know under the pandemic have been severely stressed in terms of the numbers. There are also hotlines that can be accessed as well. So I would say, make use of those services where they are available, and recognizing that under this pandemic, many of these services either have closed or are limited because of resources that have been shifted from these resources to respond to the pandemic. But nonetheless, these are resources made available throughout the states and in many countries as well, for women and girls to be able to access.
I appreciate that. And for the purpose of the global audience, we encourage you to also reach to any local agencies within your areas or spheres of access, where you can speak to, whether it's a medical care professional, somebody that is able to listen to you and to somewhat lend an ear to your situation. We want to wish you the best in your journey in life. We continue to pray for you as you take your traverse in this world. And we ask that God would do all supernaturally to open the path to you, to your deliverance, if you are in an oppressive situation. If you are in
Amen.
a position of influence, I encourage you to give to the cause and do what you can to help to be part of the solution and not the problem. Dawn, thank you so much. God continue to bless you with the awesome and amazing work that you're doing. I'm looking forward to the next time that we do this together. And everybody else, God continue to bless you as you journey. And until next time on Life Talk, continue to keep the faith.